Welcome to Kill the Cat. In this episode, we're discussing Pirates of the Caribbean and how it makes use of clowns, specifically the bumbling pirates Ragetti and Pintel. Minor spoilers ahead for the first 3 movies, but otherwise, enjoy the episode. Welcome to this episode of Kill the Cat. Today, we are talking about clowns. Specifically, we are talking about Ragetti and Pintel, who are the 2 pirate clowns from Pirates of the Caribbean. They are in the first 3 movies, so those are the ones we'll talk about. Mostly about number 1, though. We are ignoring 4 and 5 because
they should be ignored.
They are a disservice to the entire franchise and make me sad. Kat, you came up with this idea. Your pitch to me involved talking about these guys in as similar characters to Shakespearean fools.
Yeah. So firstly, this was a really big film for me in context. This is the film that made me want to be a filmmaker. I have a really strong memory of watching this film for the first time. I was about 11 years old and just being like, yes, I want to do this. So there's something about this movie that just clicked for me and began the whole obsession with film and wanting to know how films worked. I think it was the first film where I tracked down the script and I did all the behind the scenes and was blown away by how they were doing all this stuff. It was also bang in the middle of the Orlando Bloom era. It was this and Lord of the Rings. Every girl I knew at the time was into Orlando Bloom.
Of course.
So they're not actually that similar to Shakespeare's clowns. That was just kind of the inspiration when I was thinking about this. Best example would be Rosencrantz and Guildenstern from Hamlet. There's just these 2 funny characters that come in. They lighten things up for the audience. They're also really good plot devices, which we'll talk about a bit later. And also just realizing I was looking at Ragetti and Pintel from Pirates of the Caribbean and just thinking about why don't we have these characters anymore? So yeah, we were both looking at other characters that fit kind of this trope. So C-3PO and R2-D2 from Star Wars would fit. Female versions, I got the ugly stepsisters from Cinderella can serve this role. It depends on the adaptation. The one from the 90s with Brandy, definitely. Yeah, and then when I tried to think of modern examples of clowns, I got really stuck. The closest I got was Ducky and Bunny from Toy Story 4. But I think the reason those don't quite feel the same to me is because it's Key and Peele. Yeah. And look, the actors in Pirates of the Caribbean are great. I don't know who they are and I haven't seen them in anything else. And that just added to the charm for me. Because I feel now if you get these characters, they get a famous comedian to do a cameo and it's just not quite the same thing.
Yeah, I think there's maybe let's talk about some of the tropes that go with these characters. So usually they're long-term best friends, usually of the same gender, usually male, though that's probably just more a statement of the media landscape than it is an actual requirement. There is a bit of a trope of having a tall and thin one and a short and fat one. Usually of the 2 of them, one will be a bit more focused and aware of the task at hand, and one will be a bit dumber, though that one tends to be the one who comes up with the more profound views and opinions when they actually start talking, and ends up being the better read one. And that's definitely the case in this, and there's a few examples of that. And then they often bicker, being a bit like an old married couple. So I think the difference between getting your Key and Peele to play the comedic side characters is that these characters, while they do bring levity to the movie, while they do bring humor and laughs, their purpose goes beyond that of just being comedic relief. And I think that's where the difference is, right? You have Key and Peele, they're obviously doing a bit. Whereas by getting people who aren't as well known to play these roles, you're kind of playing into the trope that these characters are usually a little bit on the outside. Goals run in tandem with the main characters and the main plots, but they're a little bit off to the side and they don't quite fit in the people they're around. So when you look at the first movie, Ragetti and Pintel are part of Barbossa's crew to start with. And while they are tasked with bringing Elizabeth back, they kind of aren't fully respected by the other members of the crew. They're kind of seen as a bit not being quite as tough as the rest of the pirates. And so they kind of are always just their own unit. no matter where they are. Even when they come into Jack's crew and they kind of fit in a bit more because Jack's crew is just a hodgepodge mix of weird and wacky individuals. Even within that, they are kind of their own thing.
Yeah, and by the way, the reason like these characters, we refer to them as clowns and not Jack. Jack is comic relief, definitely. We had a bit of a discussion about this of like who is the main character, and I think I would actually argue it's Will Turner, or maybe Will and Elizabeth, at least in the first one, and Jack is a side character, which works because we're not in Jack's POV most of the time. We don't know what he's doing or what he's planning, and that's why he's so fun in the first one and why he loses more and more of his charm as the movies go on, because if you make Jack Sparrow your main character, you can't have him like being tricky and being one step ahead, and you don't know if he's going to betray them or be on their side.
Yeah, because when he's the main character and he's betraying his friends, he just kind of feels like a jerk.
Yeah.
But when he's the secondary character betraying the main character, you're like, oh, that sneaky rascal.
Yes. Sneaky rascal. Good name for Jack Sparrow. Yeah. So on that, like Jack Sparrow is comic relief versus these guys as clowns. So one of the great reasons to like throw these characters in there is they make your main characters look better and they look more fun. So there's actually another pair of clowns in this movie, which is Murtaugh and Mulroy, which are the Navy guards that aren't invited to the ceremony that Jack has the whole thing to get the interceptor. So you have that whole scene and it just makes Jack look clever and funny and witty, and it's making the audience laugh. It's making Jack look really cool, and like the Navy looks really stuffy. And it's also giving us some nice exposition. We get what the Black Pearl is. It gives us tone of the movie of like, this is really fun, but there's elements of horror in here.
I really love what this movie does in terms of genre and tone, because adventure films for me, I feel like successful adventure films should be fun primarily. And it's this weird line that the genre walks of like, it needs to be fun and silly and lighthearted while also being about kind of darker supernatural themes that can be really intense, and like epic battles that are scary, and there's monsters and all that kind of thing. And I feel like Pirates of the Caribbean does a really good job of walking the line of like, this is a fun movie with some really high stakes if you think about it, but we don't think about it because the characters are really silly.
Yeah, and I think by having these like little side characters which are even sillier than the other ones, it makes the other ones seem just like serious enough to make them feel like real people. And like in your notes too, the pirates can be scary in like a really fun camp way, especially like that skeleton scene. Mm-hmm. And Barbossa is a fun villain, but he's suave. He's a gentleman's pirate. And then we get like Ragetti and Pintel, who are the bumbling villains. But even so, I think like that first kind of sequence where we meet them and they're running around the governor's house trying to kidnap Elizabeth, they are like intimidating and quite scary, and we get the hello puppet when he's looking through the crack.
Yeah.
I had on my notes, it gave me Home Alone vibes.
Yes. I wonder if Marv and, I can't remember the other one's name, would they kind of fit the clown?
Marv and Harry?
Marv and Harry.
Interesting.
I know they are the antagonists of the movie, but they hit a lot of the tropes for clowns.
They do, actually.
If you want to see the comparison in terms of villains as well, like Barbossa is the very theatrical pirate villain. Like, he's a lot of fun as a villain for the first movie. But when you move to the second movie, you get Davy Jones. And Davy Jones never gets compared to the clowns. And actually, we get a much scarier villain because all of his subordinates, all of his crew, are actually quite scary. And like visually, they're scary because of all the coral and stuff that's growing on them. I think the funniest moment we get with his crew is when one of them loses his head and the rest of his body is like unable to find it and then just walks away.
Yeah, I remember that scene.
I love the whole sequence on that island. Everything from like the three boys starting to fight to them going in onto the like watermill. Just the whole thing is beautiful.
It's so ridiculous and so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like Elizabeth is like, oh, the heat. And she like faints and none of them pay any of attention. There's a moment in there when Pintel is like, oh, what's all this then? And Ragetti just gives us like a rundown of the plot real quick. And then Pintel says like, right then, that chest must be worth a lot. And then they go for it. And then there's like, I think this actually sums up perfectly what they're there for. They give you the plot rundown. They decide to take the chest for themselves because they think it's really valuable. They're about to fight Elizabeth for it. Davy Jones's crew comes for them and they immediately team up with Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And then they've got that sequence and they're running through, but they've only got 2 swords. So
and they're like swapping sword.
Yeah.
The first 2 movies especially, the like sword fighting is just phenomenal. Like the
It's so
way
fun.
they've staged, because that's what it's staged for. It's just staged for fun.
Even that first scene where Will fights Jack in the blacksmiths.
It is
It's
like,
so fun.
It's so fun, but it's also such a brilliantly choreographed scene in terms of using environment, having proper stakes for your characters, having good characterization, actually getting them to like discuss something. Will is like, I swore that I would kill a pirate, and Jack's like, well, I haven't done anything to you, so why are you trying to kill me?
Yeah, not to be this person, but I really don't feel like we get these kinds of movies anymore. Like, the closest we get is Marvel, but it's not quite the same. Not ragging on Marvel because I don't like that. But I feel like Marvel is now like our modern action-adventure movies. I think these have just kind of gone out of fashion, which is a shame. Like, these and The Mummy would be another one that comes to mind. Just like epic adventure films.
I was a bit disappointed. I had real high hopes for the new Star Wars trilogy.
Yeah.
That it might do something like this, because I remember watching The Force Awakens in the movies, and I really enjoyed that experience because there were so many moments where I was like, oh, this is just fun adventure. And the second one, had its moments as well, and then it just kind of lost its way. But we're off track.
Yes. Okay, so having these characters, super fun, they add a lot to tone, they're making your main characters, both protagonists and antagonists, look better, they're making them look smart, but they're also doing something else. So at no point do I feel like we cut to Ragetti and Pintel and feel like, okay, they're doing a comedy bit now. They're always part of the plot, and they actually give us a lot of exposition. Exposition's really tough. I think every screenwriter and filmmaker knows this. To get across exposition both clearly, but also in a way that isn't very boring. And having your clowns do it is such like a simple and effective way to entertain your audience while giving them interesting information.
One of the first things they go through when we meet them is Elizabeth calls parlay, and they're just like, parlay, and she's like, you have to honor the parlay, and they're like, ugh. And that keeps happening throughout the movie where someone calls parlay and they're like, why do we keep finding people who call parlay? To the point where even Jack is like trying to remember the word, and Ragetti's like, parlay? Yes, that's the one, parlay. We get introduced to this idea of parlay. I really like in the second one as well when they're in the Ragetti goes on this whole thing of becoming somewhat religious because he's like, we're not immortal anymore. Like, I need to look after my soul. And then he's trying to read the Bible, but he can't read.
It's the Bible. You get points for trying.
Yes.
I do love that in the second one, they're just floating in a boat in the ocean discussing the Bible. Doesn't matter how they got there. They're just floating towards the same island that Jack and Will happen to be on. It absolutely does not matter. It's just funny, and they need to be there, so they're there.
And it's actually, it raises a point though, because that's one of the kind of features of the clowns is that there really isn't a backstory to them. You don't get like a whole heap of character development. You don't get a history really. You just kind of see them, and from the way they interact, you know they've been together for a long time. I mean, you mentioned in your notes, like there is a point at which these two talk about, what they do with all their money. They make plans as if they're going to hang out together forever.
Yeah, and I do think the friendship is really important for these characters because they're so close. It endears us to them because, okay, they feel just real enough because they have one person who cares about them, and it's the other one.
And it lowers the stakes of all their bickering as well, right? Like they can fight each other and we know it's all just good fun.
Yeah, there's even like a sweet moment where they're divvying up the treasure and Pintel is telling Ragetti he can get like a real eye now that like doesn't splinter. He's like, yeah, it splinters. He's like, stop rubbing at it.
Splinter's something awful.
The cute married couple moment.
One of the tropes I mentioned before is that, the one who's typically a bit dimmer will be the one who comes up with, like, as if they're well read. They have the whole conversation when the Kraken is about to attack them about how do you pronounce the Kraken properly. And it's like, Kraken. And he's like, actually, it's from the Scandinavian, so it would be Kraken. And it's just like, guys, there's a Kraken. Or when they're in their dresses and they're like, this is kind of like what the Greeks did at Troy.
I really like that little Okay, just put aside for one moment that men in dresses as a comedy trope needs to die. But what that scene is doing is like, it's what the Greeks done in Troy, except on a horse instead of dresses. A wooden horse. It's short. They do not go on forever trying to give us an entire comedy scene. And it affects the plot because Pintel gets annoyed and then they start fighting, which reveals them to the moonlight. So Norrington's men sees them, which screws up the pirate's plan, which means there's fighting. I think that's just like a perfect scene to illustrate like how to use your clowns. Short, sweet, affect the plot.
Yeah, despite the fact that they're here to give us a laugh and to make us enjoy the film more, they're not wasted on just doing that. They're not just being silly.
Yeah, and I found also whenever there was like a little task that needed to be done or like a moment. So for example, when Elizabeth is on the Black Pearl and she needs to be summoned to go to dinner with Barbossa and he wants her to wear a dress, it's Ragetti and Pintel who do that. It's not, pirate number 4. They're the ones who bring Elizabeth to the Black Pearl. Just like little moments that could be filled in by a featured extra. You have these characters to do that for you.
Yeah, well, when Barbossa tests if they've completed the ritual and shoots someone, he shoots Pintel. Again, don't use a pirate. Use someone you've got so that we can get a laugh from a character we love.
They're also really good. I noticed whenever we needed a reaction shot for a scene, they'd cut to them and we'd see their reaction or even like little lines. There's a fun one in the second one where Calypso is kind of giving like a big exposition scene and I had like, it was Ragetti and Pintel and also Gibbs were kind of acting as like a Greek chorus and like chiming in and commenting and it was fun and it felt in character and it didn't feel like this character, Calypso, was just giving a big long monologue of exposition. I also love that they just join Jack and Will's crew in the second one. There's no conversation about it.
No.
They're running towards the boat. They're like, we've prepped the boat for you. And that's it. They're in the crew. And they just join them.
But it's totally in character because it's like originally they were going to take the boat with them. And now it's like, oh, we're going to be caught out. So we'll just go along with this.
I think that's a fair point too of like, they will always do what's best for them. And sometimes that works out for the main characters and sometimes it doesn't. But they always have, and they don't have malicious goals or anything. But no. Like you said, they're their own unit and they're out for themselves. Fun little thing in the third one. At the very end, you've got Ragetti and Pintel, but you've also got Murtaugh and Mulroy, who have somehow survived to the end of the third movie, and they become pirates, and we get like a shot of all 4 of them hanging out. And I thought that was pretty cute. And Pintel's last words in the films are, "Goodbye, puppet."
Aw, that's a good callback. I like that.
I understand that the third one gets a bad rap, but there are moments in there that I quite enjoy.
Yeah, that's fair.
It has its moments.
Yeah, so there's a lot you can do with these characters. Bringing levity, setting tone for the film, keeping it in genre, just having someone to give you a reaction shot. There's also, we've said this in our second episode, but the idea of skipping the boring bits, having someone to cut to in story, like cutting to another scene so that you're not just skipping time but staying with Jack and Will. Like you can actually go see someone else and what they're doing. Introducing these characters into a plot that needs to be fun and adventurous is a really good way to allow your main characters to be focused on themselves and not have to provide all the exposition and comedy beats.
Yeah, like I have never written characters like these. I've never thought about writing characters like these. So that's quite a big takeaway for me. Maybe in my next long form project, I might look into having a pair like this. They flesh out the world. They're fun. They're memorable. It's just like a neat and tidy way to do certain things that maybe you don't need the featured extras for. I think that would be my takeaway. If you are going through your script, and this is probably more advice for like a TV show or feature rather than a short, but if you're constantly finding yourself having like featured extras, maybe just take a moment and think, can these be recurring characters with names instead of just continually adding like people who don't really matter to the plot? I think that would be my big takeaway here.
Yeah, good. And yeah, definitely it's I can't see how you would fit this into a short film well, but for something like a feature film, this could be a really good tool. You pointed out actually in your notes that like they weren't originally a duo in the early script.
No. Yeah, so fun fact, it's just Pintel in the script. In the movie, Barbossa kind of has like a first mate. That's essentially who Pintel is, and he's a lot more serious and he's meant to be a lot scarier, and it's just him. He serves kind of the same purpose plot-wise, but yeah, Ragetti isn't there. I did try and research as to why that was changed and when. I couldn't find any information, but I'm glad it was changed to this because this is a lot more fun.
Yeah, exactly. That was our episode on Pirates of the Caribbean and how to use clowns. If you liked it and want to hear more, you can subscribe to us on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice. We've got upcoming episodes on Atlantis, The Emperor's New Groove, and Avatar: The Last Airbender. You can also support the show by leaving us a review or telling a friend about us. Until next time, this has been Kill the Cat.
It was really fun to revisit this after the rest of the franchise, I feel like, has kind of soured.
You know what it really is? It's that they didn't include Pintel and Ragetti in anything after the third film.
That's very true.
That's why it went downhill.
Totally.
These two were the key to this franchise working. That's the hill I'm going out on.
It's your hot take.